I do a test when I come in like in a company and I ask them, okay, what are you doing about your Gen AI? If they're all telling me about model training, I know it's going to be a hard sell.
You're listening to the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning back into the AI Native Dev. Today, I am excited to dig into the analogy of AI native development and how does it compare to DevOps, to cloud native development, and to really offer a bright perspective about that. We have Patrick Debois, who has done many, many things across his career on it. Here, we'll just emphasize that he's one of the core drivers and leaders in forming the DevOps movement, created DevOps Days, and has really shaped a lot of what we think of as modern DevOps today and the practices, and has spent the last year or two immersing into Gen AI and how that really impacts software development and such. So Patrick, thanks for coming onto the show.
Yes, and Guy, it's exciting, right? So these new technologies, and some people might not expect this from me saying, okay, it's culture first, DevOps. There's two things. Obviously, there's tools and there's culture in this case. But yes, I'm excited.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think the analogy is quite strong. So I guess maybe we start indeed with that question is, do you think the analogy between AI native development and cloud native or DevOps, is that an apt analogy when you think about the magnitude of change here, or you think about what we need to consider in it? Does it feel like a usefulness, an apt lens?
Yeah, I think over my career, there's been these kind of like instrumental technology moments, right? And it's always something new, and whether that was the mobile or all of a sudden was serverless or cloud native and Kubernetes, there's always this emerging kind of feeling that you're at. And those kind of new technologies, we often in the beginning don't know exactly where it leads to. Mm-hmm. We're trying and playing with this, but ultimately they have an influence on the way we work. I would say that the Gen AI, if I look back, the speed of impact, that is drastically different, right? All of a sudden, you can share something, tomorrow somebody can use it, it goes into production. So that speed is definitely different than when the early cloud native days were emerging and people were trying to figure this out.
It's much easier to interweave it into the activities than it was before. I guess maybe aspects of cloud were a bit earlier, right? Like S3, for instance, I think got pretty quick adoption. Is it about the ease of adopting it into your workflows, or is it just about the sort of the sex appeal?
Hype travels definitely faster, but looking beyond the hype, I think almost like the tools like using an LLM have been so democratized. Like you didn't, in the early days of cloud first, you had to spend some infrastructure and so on. But now, if I'm a lawyer, I can use ChatGPT, I can use OpenAI, and it's there. That kind of gets it much faster in usage, and also has everybody much faster on the train because they see the possibilities of how this is doing. And that's different, but I think that is due to the saucification of things that it's so commoditized and so easy to get at.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's easier to provide a solution that is Gen AI powered. And as a result of that, there are just many more.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't want to be in OpenAI's shoes serving the world. So that part is not different.
Like from a scale perspective, indeed, and you have to support everything.
So that's definitely the speed, the impact, the companies playing into the hype, the new technology, the startups, the funding that's there, right? That kind of like rocket ship doing this. And that's been instrumental in pushing this forward. Similarities, again, nobody in the beginning of cloud native knew exactly how. We've seen many iterations before we got to more standardized things like Kubernetes everybody settled on. But before there was like numerous iterations. And this is where I feel we're at. We're like in the fast iteration phase. Today, this company's hot. Tomorrow, there's going to be another. We're just churning through until we settle on a base that kind of, not saying the winner takes it all, but it could be in very different forms. Every time there's been a new release, there's also the problem of this being like a thin veneer layer on top of an LLM that people are, and I'm not saying it's useful, but everybody can start building this as such. And so that fast building is really different than in the past. If you're looking for more similarities, maybe on the cultural side in the group, I experienced early bringing AI into a company in the product that the teams that were doing the AI or kind of the AI engineers there, they were not used to production. There was somewhere, and I always joke, they're somewhere in there, assuming in their data lake,
Yeah.
nobody knew, building reports, and all of a sudden they became star of the show.
Right.
So that kind of friction I've seen firsthand of one group not working together with another group. And obviously it was the same with Dev and Ops, and bringing them closer together because we need to get into production. There is value there and we need to bring that to the end customer. And that's definitely a friction point. I think it was called in this time, not shift left, Guy, but it was shift right, getting them closer to production. And that's definitely also a cultural change in kind of an organization.
I love that point around breaking the silos, just like we did between dev and ops, or that was a key driver there, but also with the data. I remember a conversation with one of the lead security people in one of the big banks who was talking about how he's been spending years cultivating his relationship with the development team and working on it. And you can debate if he is or isn't happy about it, but it's deep. He knows who to talk to. They've had a long time conversation. Mm-hmm. And suddenly there's this whole horde of new people that he needs to talk to that he hasn't. He doesn't even know who he's supposed to talk to. And they don't know who he is and what concerns. And he had security concerns, like, where is this data even coming from? And do you know you can trust it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also true for operations. It's also true for anything production. So that's a really good point. And I guess, have you seen organizations take it on in that type of outlook, right? Or thinking about, hey, what have we done around dev and ops?
Most of the initial projects are often done with the data science folks or something because they're closer to the kind of the data.
They can achieve the functionality, right?
And so a lot of what I hear from companies is this is where the incubation happens in the company. They understand the lingo a little bit, but then they often lack, like we mentioned, like going to production and kind of bringing that in is where you bring in the engineering. A lot of people in the data science think, hey, I have a Jupyter notebook and I'm good, right? We can't run this on production. And I definitely see in companies deliberately infusing either the data science team with more engineering or traditional engineering folks to deliver the proof of concept and not just to stay in the kind of eternal mode. I do a test when I come in like in a company and I ask them, okay, what are you doing about your Gen AI? If they're all telling me about model training, I know it's going to be a hard sell because the company is overrun by the data science folks and they will tell you like the data needs to be perfect and we need to get everything. I believe the new game is about integration, much like DevOps was about integration of the two worlds. I do not need to have a deep understanding of all the algorithms, but I can definitely put it to use. And that's why I'm also so attracted to this field, because I always had an eye on the data science folks, but the math went beyond my brain.
Yeah.
But this game I've been doing for a long time, and there's a lot of similarities on how to do that integration and bring that to production.
Yeah, I think I really like this analogy. And I guess if we think about DevOps, you had some companies that they created these DevOps teams, which is ironic. But we have these, it's fine that they're called DevOps teams, but oftentimes these DevOps teams were actually not trying to break silos. What they were doing is, this is the team that uses infrastructure as code. They're the Puppet and Chef users on it. And therefore, unlike their predecessors in ops, they are coders a little bit. They know how to build things. Maybe they're at some point even using Terraform, but they weren't tackling the culture shift. So it feels maybe it's a little bit like that, right? You have your AI engineers today are being formed. They might know how to build applications out of these LLMs or like wrangle LLMs to do something effective. And they might traverse further back into the actual data scientist, but there might still be a gap to the production side of it.
Indeed. Yeah.
And who would you say needs to fill that gap? If you were to optimally set up an organization, how do you imagine it would be set up in terms of responsibilities?
When there's a new technology, and again, you can have the mobile team being a new one, it doesn't matter, right? So they're the incubators. And then you have to make a choice in a way that, are they just going to be the team that always takes care of this? And in some companies that makes sense. Oh, it's the chat team, the chatbot team, and it's the only thing they do. But if you're set out to, for example, say, all my engineers, when they're building, I want them to be able to use these new AI technologies to do certain things faster, to get better results. Then I would have to scale up my traditional engineers with some training, right? So I would use that AI data science team and say, you're now the mentors of what goes on in the other teams. It could be the same as the developer experience team. It's an enablement team that goes across your organization, who goes into each of the teams and helps them get bootstrapped. the point is not about making them all the experts, because
Right.
they will stay the experts, much like the DevOps folks were not supposed to get everybody to do all the DevOps stuff,
Right.
but just enough that they know when to ask and things they can do themselves. So that's scaling out the knowledge as a pattern in the different organizations. There is then, if you continue that journey, there is also a part where there's shared infrastructure. I do not want all the teams to run their LLMs in a different way. I do not want to have guardrails in every different flavor. So you see more of a standardization happening. And that's similar like when you have a few teams and you can build like guilds around it, exchange it. But then the infrastructure, in my belief, is very similar to your cloud infrastructure, but it's just the AI infrastructure. That could be a proxy that filters things. That's how you monitor things. That's a centralized way of getting feedback. So you see, those are similar to a cloud catalog of services. We're going to provide all the teams with an AI services catalog and say, if you need this, and then we are working the same way as this is the paved road.
Right.
This is the standard way.
Sounds like familiar terms now. Yeah.
Yes. And then if you want to deviate it, that's fine, but your cost. So in that way, I see this scale out. And this is what I see companies like Cisco or Adobe. They're taking the same pattern of one team enabling the other team, scaling this out, and then absorbing the central pieces into your platform. And it's not just about the infrastructure. It is the enablement on the infrastructure, and then it's the governance that you put on that centralized piece. Because that's another problem that you all have to take care of in each of the teams if you're using this. I don't want you to use these kind of models.
Yeah.
How do I not force, but at least make sure that you know about this and put that in guidelines. So.
Yeah, makes perfect sense to me. So if I echo back a little bit here, you start with the digital transformation team on it, or whatever, some specific group that is specifically enabling something that now has heavy use of LLM, right? Maybe it didn't even exist before, right? And now you have it. The rest of the company continues to operate as they had before, or maybe they have some interaction with this group, but generally it's an addition, it's a specific product. And so you don't need shared infrastructure because it's just this group. When a third group forms and things like that, now you start needing, okay, I've got some shared infrastructure. And so that might require that sort of platform team starting to have governance capabilities, starting to have some uniformity as you expand into some future. I guess that was true for cloud, and it's debatable for AI or LLMs. Do we get ourselves to a place in which everything is LLM powered? You can make that case or not. I think in cloud, it felt obvious at some point, which is everybody needs a server to run on. And so you will run on the cloud and run in that fashion. With AI, maybe a bit more debatable, but the more you expand it, the more you need to have enablement, have those. And I guess you get into shared responsibility mode as well. Now it's okay, someone else is running these LLMs, maybe even constraining you with that paved road or really making your life quite difficult to deviate from it. So maybe I chose a specific partner. Enterprises do this today, right? I've chosen one of the specific foundation models to partner with. And so you're constrained, you have to use that. But then within that sandbox or within those boundaries, the application teams are the ones that...
And it's not just about running your own LLMs. Like even if they're all a SaaS version of the LLM, you still have to say, we're going to put the right check marks for the policies in place. We're going to make sure that we have volume discounts, much like we have CDN costs at dealing with. So those are all things. And again, one of the important services people keep forgetting is when you put these things out, yes, governance, guardrails, but gathering feedback from the end users to make it better. That's also a component you do not want each of the teams to do. And tracing, observability, all those kind of things fit in that group. Again, it's not about having your own infrastructure, but it's like managing that kind of suite of services and offering them as a kind of a standard package.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about within the organization, the culture or different aptitudes that you need amongst those people that work. Because in DevOps, that was significant, right? Part of it was technical enablement or maybe the skills of knowing how to work with a cloud or knowing how to work. But then there were all these other things. For instance, probably most well known is the pace of delivery, right? The sort of the continuous deployment and the notion of a much more dynamic software development process, which required different people. In DevOps, indeed, there were people that needed to become coders or be a little bit more comfortable with code from being sysadmins. I guess when you think about AI, you think about those teams. Maybe put aside the actual concrete data scientists, think about the software engineers that are working with these systems. Do you see a similar culture shift required? What are the different skills or aptitudes needed?
I think I've hit most of the times a discussion around these LLMs are non-deterministic, so therefore we cannot trust them, therefore we cannot use them. But mostly it is about people not understanding how you test this more reliably. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's dealing with uncertainty. That's a shift that people have to go through. And once you explain them that there are certain ways to do this that limit this, then you got them over and become more engineering practices again. Otherwise, it's more like, yeah, it looks good to me, but hey, I don't know how I should do this. The second thing that usually I see companies do is while getting their engineering teams excited on AI and the new technology, they also get them excited about the new set of tools that help them in the new job. Because that kind of, if they see the power in their day-to-day job, they're also likely to get more excited on using this because they want to understand how this works and go from there.
So if they're excited by Copilot and whatever, seeing how that makes them more productive, they're more excited about adding a Copilot-like capability into
for example,
product.
But if they don't see the value there, they're going to be quite negative on using the tooling and bringing it into their kind of product as well. So
I found I very much relate and experience the joy, if I was to air quote it, of the lack of predictability of the LLMs and not knowing. It's very hard to evaluate them. Maybe we'll dig into that a bit more. Des Traynor, the founder of Intercom, who in an early episode here on the podcast, said that you basically need to make peace with the fact that you don't know if your product works. And one of the thoughts that I had was, it's actually quite analogous to, it's another step change in the same direction that we had when we ship software more continuously, right? When you went from these sort of quarterly releases that were thoroughly tested or annual releases that were thoroughly tested, that you felt like your confidence level around what we said we are doing is actually what we are doing was very, very high, to places that really celebrates many releases in a given day and observability and knowing whether your product works or not by observing it in production. Yes, you add tests, you don't just blindly ship the software, but embracing this notion that the tests may fail, or rather that the test may pass and that the product may fail in production, and be very well instrumented to identify that happened, to roll back and to learn from it, or to gradually. And it feels a little bit like maybe LLMs take it to another level, like I really have no idea. But all these concepts of these canary releases, gradual rollouts, observability, the ability to roll back, and all those are kind of the same tools, right? Is it fair to think of it as another order of magnitude or another step in the same direction in terms of what should your ops and software delivery practices be?
I think in ops, we've always dealt with chaos because we all understand that in theory, everything should be great for the customer, but in reality, we look at our log files and it's not, right? So in that way, yes, the observability is one step in the right direction to know, when you're dealing, like first there's monitoring and then there's observability. It did what in production? Let me check that for you. Right. So that's where you see a lot of people put that in production to see what the customers are experiencing. Then I guess we learned that in the cloud architectures, we were no more architecting for that one machine that could not fail. We architected an assumed failure.
Right.
And I'm seeing this kind of is happening also here. If the LLM might not give the right answer, what are we doing to control this?
Right.
We're not going to put this in to decide whether you get a raise or not. You could, it's probably not the best use.
No.
But understanding what use cases is the failure, yes or no. We had one interesting example is that we used actually the UX to our advantage. So LLMs can generate the text. And let's say a year ago, they were not always that fast.
Right.
So we use that to our advantage that the customers and the users knew it was being generated by AI. So they had to bring more attention to verifying this. We had icons with a sparkle on there. That meant it's AI. So again, this is not technical, but these are cues of like warning also people saying this is not perfect. It doesn't mean it's not helpful and they can just reload and retry and regenerate and that's fine. But sometimes you see it's not always that technical that needs to be perfect. It's you architect around this and kind of deal with the imperfection there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's actually maybe an advantage that AI gives us that we didn't have in the cloud, because in the cloud, the customers generally didn't know and didn't care if you're hosted on
It's
the
too low
cloud
layer.
or in your own data center. Their expectation of uptime or of performance or all of those are the same, whether you're hosted on the cloud or your data center. And with AI, there's in certain use cases a certain level of tolerance maybe that we're getting, because users are also willing to adapt their ways, which is a card or an opportunity that is a helper for those building the LLM-based product. Within this world, though, it's convenient and there's a lot to learn from, indeed, this path of saying, okay, you have to really be good at this. And this analogy keeps coming up. I had a conversation with Armon from HashiCorp on a recent episode, and we were talking about how if you want to do self-healing and all sorts of, crazy things in your ops stack, then actually the way to be best equipped to do that is to already be very good at operations and be accumulating. If you already accumulated and instrumented all your system, you accumulated this data, observability data, iteration data, all of that about your system, you can probably inform the LLM-based tool or LLM-powered tool that is trying to do self-healing better, and therefore you can do self-healing better. So there's like a compounding effect. Basically, the teams, the haves and the have-nots, are growing further apart in that operations. And I guess here it's another muscle in the same vein, because you get better. But I do think some aspects of it, like the evaluation, they get extreme, right? When you ship a new product, for instance, even when you're very opsy, very dynamic, for iterations, for improvements, you can work in this type of incremental, roll it out, do it in small bits, evolve it. When you ship a new capability, you need to have a certain level of confidence that it is above a bar to be able to ship it. And I guess that's proven very hard on some capabilities in the LLM world. What is the view that you formed around evaluation, around this quality and the ability to assess it in the world of LLMs?
We made some great strides there. The evaluations in the beginning were more when you were building your own LLMs, and that was built for that. And obviously, they have a lot of money and they can spend a lot of time building the perfect data set. But for your use case, because that's usually what it boils down to, like I build something for my use case, and it's not like a standard available test set that I have. So yes, you have a domain expert creating questions, but now we actually have LLMs assisting us to write better questions and to ease the generation of those evaluations better. So that's one way. That's the synthetic way of creating those evaluations together with the domain experts. And then the third source is actually when it went wrong from production, is feed those examples back into your test evaluation set. So that kind of improves it. But that's why that return aspect is so important, that you notice the differences. Is it perfect? By no means, but it is changing one comma in a prompt will have different results. So that's why we've learned that we need to have that test set. It doesn't need to be a million things you test, but at least the most common cases that gives you that impact feel. If you change the model, likely your tests are going to be different, and then you need to tune your prompt a little bit. There is, on the other hand, also but something that's going to help us is tools like DSPY that actually rewrite or refactor prompts based on what the model is we're using. So they're getting more clever on, much like we do refactoring of code, but refactoring the prompt because they know this is the model. You probably want to phrase it like this. So we get a little bit of help, almost like a transpiler of prompts in there. Again, not perfect, but we've come a long way from doing the manual thing to having it more assisted. And then you get into the feedback loop, very similar to your code, where you say, okay, this evaluation, no, this is not good. Okay, I prompt with a better one. So that's the test battery that you're doing. I think what we learned was very important is that often testing is seen as something the developer does, but we learned that to actually write those tests and the questions of the domain is something that needs to be moved to the product owner. And they don't do this in code. They don't do this in prompt, but they need a system that actually allows them to do this quite easily and see the impacts of the changes and do the validation. So there's a little bit of a shift from testing is for the engineers, although we already had that problem with business tests and so on. But this moved up to actually the product owners again.
And to an extent, that's a shift further left element because you're going further upstream to the requirements. But it's interesting. It sounds like you're describing, on one hand, very much engineering action of basically better instrumentation of your testing process. We need to learn from failures. I think in the past, the tests were binary. If they passed, great. If they didn't pass, you only used the failures momentarily to get them to pass, but it didn't actually try to store that data or do anything iterative. And now it feels like maybe we should think about testing processes and workflows somewhat in a similar way to what we think about operations and systems. We need to capture and learn from the failures as well so we can optimize and tune our systems. And that's very like a technical piece. So that piece maybe moves from ops to dev. Hey, dev, you need to learn a little bit from your ops counterparts to do those. And then further left in the product side is like you have to define what good looks like, what it means that the product works and what it doesn't, what versus not, because that's going to have to be codified.
But much like we reuse the testing from the BDD to test the monitoring in production, this is the same thing here, right? You write your evals, but then you have a specific set of evals. You're basically running all the time as a health check because maybe the model changed something on AWS side or something, you don't know, but you will notice the difference. And that's like, you don't run your full test suite, but at least more strategically test there. So.
But I agree. But I think in general, the key takeaway here is the notion of evaluation, the notion of knowing what is correct and incorrect in your product has really jumped up in importance because you have to assess these unpredictable systems and see what they are, what they're doing. And interesting, it's like the unpleasant thought to think about whether laggards might actually have a little bit of an advantage.
But I think putting on my history hat again, every time there's a new technology, in the beginning, people say, I think that's only valued because the first part of the problem is making it work. And then you progress into more maturity. Okay, we need to do more repeatedly, and then have to prepare for failure and so on. So I think that's only normal that I asked that question as meetups. You've been live now for 5 months, and how do you test? And then you hear like crickets, right? Because they're still doing, oh, it looks good to me.
Yeah.
And if you can do it, and it's definitely not something you can do at scale, and debate about TDD or not, it's very much still.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess what we said before, how users give you some slack, that's probably temporary as well. Eventually, users are, if you want me to use this tool, it should work. It's your problem that it's unpredictable. Just make it work.
It all looks very easy in the beginning, but getting it robust.
It is something that you have to work with, and you have to really change your strategy. It feels like a craft in the making. It feels like it's not entirely unique because we had these types of untrusted or unreliable pieces of our software development, and so it's hard to define your software methodology around it.
So if I look at how DevOps as a profession has matured, first 20% was infrastructure as code. Eventually, we re-architectured the stuff through resilience engineering because then failure, we already touched that.
Yeah, so we were assuming these systems will break, and we're not really sure why that is.
The dreams is all the agents going to take care of all their jobs, but the reality is they're not going to be perfect. That's inherent in the technology. It's not perfect. So you can actually replay the agent up to a point, and then you can go from there. Sometimes it generates multiple options, so you get to choose. People are starting to figure out not just the initial, but it's kind of like dealing.
So maybe sometimes it's hard. Even the term like AI engineer, are you referring to a software developer that is developing with AI? Are you referring to someone who is building like applications that use AI? Are you talking about an agent, an AI agent that is writing code for you? The ambiguity is massive. But as you point out, it's just things are moving so quickly that it's not something that's inherent in this domain. The terms will solidify. Extent as DevOps is never like fully settled. And I guess what we need to do, and we're doing it right here, is sharing the learning, sharing the perspective, maybe at the moment on many different stages, but at least many people are hearing it. And I think as long as we continue doing that, we'll try to consolidate where is relevant and just keep the sharing going. Thanks, Patrick, for sharing all these great views. I think there's a ton of learnings, and I recommend to everyone to follow Patrick's LinkedIn and all the social networks because he has all these super interesting experiments.
YouTube, so you can
it's worth doing it because we've been doing all sorts of interesting kind of hands-on work of what does it actually feel like to code with voice, right? And to automate cursor. And so we don't have time to cover all of those, unfortunately, over here, but I recommend you try that out. So thanks again, Patrick, for coming on. And thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla.